Anca Cristofovici was born in Bucharest, Romania, and in 1985 she defected to France, where she is currently a professor of American literature and art. The author of 2 previous books of nonfiction and co-editor of a third, Cristofovici has also published her poetry, prose, and translations in Romanian, English, and French in Europe and the United States. Anca will be reading tonight from her new novel, Stella, which was published by Nine Bark Press, which is a press that I co-edit with my colleagues Michael Mejia and Mindy Wilson. Stella is a really fabulous novel in a couple of that word's meanings. Give you just a little bit of the sense of the plot of the book. Years after her mother's disappearance from an unnamed city in an unnamed country governed by a repressive regime, a young dancer, Cora, struggles to untangle the knot of half-truths and informational gaps surrounding the official story. Thoughtful, inventive, and beautifully lyric, Anca Cristofovici's novel Stella masterfully challenges the obfuscations of state terror and its long roles of the disappeared with the liberating and illuminating transformations of dreams and art. In this novel, Cristofovici navigates for us the perimeter of fear, which has to do with the communist oppressive government, but that navigation, looking for truth, which is much more difficult than we would like it to be, is something that has ramifications and revelations for each of us. This is a beautifully told novel, beautifully difficult, some readers have said. But then, when is truth ever really simple? So, as an editor of Nine Bark Press, my most exciting moment was when I came across this manuscript in our submissions file. It stood out from the start as a remarkable voice. And one of my best moments as a teacher is to be able to bring you such a voice tonight. So please help me in welcoming Anca Cristofovici.
Thank you, Sandy. Thanks a lot. I'm very pleased to be here tonight. Thank you all for being here. I'm particularly happy to be back in the South, where I've spent some of my formative years, and I still have the resonances of the Southern accent and the richness of the Southern history. And I'm also very happy to be part of the Nine Bark Press adventure. I would like to thank those of you here who have supported Nine Bark Press. It's an extraordinary gift to make, not only for one book or for one press, but for one culture, which is extraordinarily receptive and curious, and I'm really happy to be part of this adventure. Thank you so much. I will read a few fragments, but before I would like, I write in very short forms, but I speak a lot. Some of you must have noticed. So I have decided that if I start speaking, I'll never get to read. So I put down a few things that are really important for me, that I would like the reader to know, that might be helpful when you read. But first of all, I've been questioning my deep attachment to the South, the fact that after the years I've spent in North Carolina And when I went back to France, when I was missing home, the sense of home was very strange for me, and I couldn't miss a place that I deliberately left, and that was heavy with a lot of trauma and sad things, and most of the things that I have loved no longer existed. So I have unconsciously displaced my home sickness on North Carolina, so I miss North Carolina. And I think I found an answer to my attachment to the South in a self-interview that, you know, some writers just are unhappy with the questions the journalist asks, and I found several. Tennessee Williams wrote one, and I found one in a Conjunctions issue, I think, self-interview published in 1977, entitled Questions They Never Asked Me, by Walker Percy, okay, so a Southern writer. And I had a sense of identification with the issues that he raises in connection to the Southern writer, because there is this association with exoticism and trauma, and so it's very hard, as it was hard for me. I talked about this a little bit in class today, to construct myself as a writer in Romania because of a specific cultural and also political context. So Walker Percy speaks about the necessity for the writer to be no one, I quote, as the very condition of making anything. Is that okay? I don't... so the necessity for the writer to be no one as the very condition of making anything. And I must say that, as difficult as it was for me to live through several dislocations and relocations, what I have learned, and what was extraordinary, was that the first step precisely to be a writer is to be no one. That is, to start from scratch and to construct your whole vocabulary, which all writers do, but in a larger cultural context. I also very much identify with what Percy says, that, you know, about this construction of the self as a writer. I quote, "What you were doing is stripping yourself naked and putting yourself in the eye of the hurricane and leaving the rest to chance, luck, and providence." Okay. And I think I did have some chance and luck in spite of the many trials and tribulations. It is extraordinarily moving for me to bring that small book, which has taken so long to write and to even think of writing, to bring it so far in space. I first read in Salt Lake City, so I'm somehow getting a bit closer to Europe here. But perhaps it isn't that far in space, since, inspired by actual stories, this book is mainly about the imagination, its powers, its limits, and also its dangers. Sometimes the imaginations is the only room there is, runs the line in the book. And I do hope readers will find their place in that room, no matter where they come from and what their imaginations are informed by. This is why my interest in locale is only peripheral. A word which peripheral, which incidentally also means near the surface of the body. It's a sense that was lost of the word peripheral, near the surface of the body. And the body is precisely one of the running themes in the novels, how one carries it and how one is carried by one's body in particular circumstances. Other running themes in the novel related to this figure, the body, are surviving in captivity or abduction, surviving in constrictive systems, surviving loss, along a sense of reality shattered by political practices, dislocations, relocations, doubt, uncertainty, enhanced by mysterious disappearances, and eventually transcending trauma through the transfigurations of dream and art. The main themes of the book then are not limited to one particular area. And even if the book is grounded in experiences of totalitarianism and its consequences on the most intimate relations of family, language, memory, I have tried to grasp the mechanism of a system, which parts of it are contextual, which are just part of human nature. Systematic and chaotic is a significant pair in the novel. And my concern was rather with ordinary aspects of extraordinary events. In the media, the changes in the world over the past 25 years have been presented mostly in a script dominated by a rhetoric of suffering and violence, which solicits our emotions visually and narratively in ways that are often inappropriate, and we had a chance to talk about this with some of you last night. In the novel, I have tried to create a web of emotions the reader can identify with regardless of their environment, and to focus on details that help one carry on. It is always something small, like a glass of water, that often helps in limit situations. But then Stella's peripeties bring together many, many stories I have read or heard, documentary films or photos I have seen from countries under communist rule, but also details of captivity stories and of stories coming from different parts of the world that have to do with the limitations of individual liberties. So I care very much about not isolating those experiences and creating a perspective which is not outspokenly political, folkloric, or anecdotic. There is a huge responsibility when one deals with such material, because you don't want to deform or misappropriate someone's very intimate stories. The conundrum I was faced with was how to make a fictional framework that would hold both documentary fact and fantasies prompted by the impossibility to know the truth without verging on victimization or sentimentalism. For me, there are many ways to deal with that, and some remarkable writers have done it. But for me, given my sensibility, the way of dealing with that difficulty was stylization and poetic perspective. It seemed to me that so much heavy-duty historical and psychological material, because every single detail in this book, as poetic as it might seem, is true, but transformed or placed into a context which transforms its meaning up to a certain point. And that was the difficulty: up to what point is it possible to transform it? So it seemed to me that all that emotional, heavy material might be more effectively channeled in a shorter form, more evocative, even if elusive. And I have tried to retain the transcendent capacity of poetry while telling the story, a story which is like a mosaic made of many, many pebbles. You know, there are many techniques of making more sophisticated Byzantine mosaics from golden pieces of stone or glass, but also they're in gardens. In Italy, for instance, you often find mosaics done in pebbles, which are figurative, but they are made of all these small pieces, individual pieces, which make up a larger picture. In the origin of the word mosaic, actually, when I was writing this, I thought, okay, well, where does this word come from, in fact? And it was actually a word used for a work of or for the muses. And I found that interesting because Stella is very much for the other characters, Cora, her daughter, who becomes a dancer, and brings her own life and her mother's life further, and Luca, her partner, who is an artist. Stella, for both of them, is a kind of muse through that paradox of her absence. So that this story, the form of the novel is not at all, has nothing to do with postmodern experimentation, because there have been so many novels in fragmented forms. It was really a necessity, because the novel is about broken lives. Okay, so I've tried to find a form that corresponded to that reality and to give it a coherence which was other, that is that of the poetry which brings together so many diverse experiences. The fragmentary forms is then related to this reality of broken lives, the stories of broken lives that I have captured here and there, and tried not to reconstruct, but just to make sense of what I had observed and make sense of what I had in my hands or in my knowledge, and then not speculate and make more of them, and see how that little fragment I had in my hands or heard or saw, and how it relates to other fragments, and how instead of continuing one of these stories and giving it a larger body, it was kind of a chorus. There is this beautiful book by Susan Griffith, A Chorus of Stones, which tells the story of her experience in Germany during and after the Second World War. So a kind of chorus. I wanted these fragments to communicate between them. I thought that these people's lost lives would be more vividly brought back to, not to life, but to attention, if they were kept, with a little that I knew instead of inventing more, and that through this associative method they will come in resonance and tell us precisely something not only about that particular experience, individual experience, but about human nature in general. And that resonance, that chamber of echoes, was a way of exploring aspects of human nature that are sometimes disturbing, puzzling, and then of course the material was partial knowledge or misunderstandings. A lot of these histories are just partial knowledge. Details that persist in spite of everything that happened. And as one reads the book, I hope all these details and partial images build into an overall picture. Not only of totalitarianism, not only of constrictive systems, but of the human nature in general. I like to keep apart as much as I can my academic work and my writing, but one thing they have in common is how an individual engages with experiences and environments of varied natures, with relocation and displacement, and how in the process cultures cross, idioms are transformed, and how these experiences enhance our sense of freedom. This is one of the paradoxes of the book. Loss allows for a part of freedom, and that niche that loss creates may become a workshop of the self, helping one to transcend determinations of many kinds, and this is what Cora is doing through her art. The decision to have the narrator as a dancer was not there from the beginning. I started with this image of the mother returning in in her daughter's dreams and fantasies, and then I've been haunted by an image of a mother carrying a child in a very dark space to a dance class, and they were never getting there. And that image kept coming back, and then I realized there is a moment in the first part where Cora in this fantasy of her mother's returning, with her mother is older now, but you know how parents sometimes become, there's this inversion. And so Cora is carrying her mother, and we don't know really what happened to her mother, if she had undergone psychiatric treatment, or she's sick, or she's just tired, and she keeps carrying her, and she's very slow, so there is an inversion of this image. And all that seemed very, very intense and powerful. And suddenly, because I am interested in dance, I've never been a dancer and I don't dance, but in watching modern dance has been one of the most extraordinary artistic experiences for me, and it was very important for my writing and the way in which I think the body in terms of writing. So it suddenly became, I said, there's too much weight, I have to. And so it suddenly became clear that she had to be a dancer. Among other reasons, this is why art plays such a pivotal role in the novel. Because Luca is a visual artist, he recreates Stella's portrait in a video piece. Cora is a dancer, and again, this is not, they meet in an artist's residence. This is not at all to place the story in it would be inappropriate when there is so much drama and so many vital things to just play with doing something fancy and having art there. It's really vital. It is a way for these two characters, a way to survival and a way of transforming their experience into something that is significant. And I am interested in individual stories of surviving precisely for how they resonate with creativity, because one needs perseverance and some luck to go on in unpropitious circumstances, but also a lot of imagination and creativity. And I read a lot of memoirs of people who have been in the Russian camps or in prison, and it is extraordinary how one can invent, you know, how to go from one day to another. And I suddenly I was just, okay, I have to remember this if it ever happens to me. You know, it's just extraordinary. You cannot imagine a woman how she is with her children there, and she is taking a bag of potato and trying to make a coat because that child is cold in Siberia and they have nothing, and she makes a coat of a bag of potatoes, but how to sew it, and she finds a wire on the ground and makes a needle. And so that is a lot of imagination and a lot of creativity. It's hard for us to imagine now when we take all these things for granted. And a lot of imagination also. I have known, even personally, but also I have read stories of poets in Romania, but I think that must be everywhere, who were in prison and they couldn't write, okay? They didn't have the right to have a pencil and a pen. And so they would rehearse their poetry in their mind, and then they learned Morse, and there were the heating pipes. So they knew that, like in the cell upstairs, there was another poet, and they would Morse the poem so that if in case something happens to the author, someone else remembers. It's extraordinary. So that's also something that is related to creativity and where art is absolutely vital. If these people did not have that possibility, they would have been dead mentally and dead. What is dead for? And this is why the novel ends. It starts in this dark space with a lot of gaps. And progressively following this character, Cora, getting out of the perimeter of fear, and her partner work their way out through art. It gets into the light, so don't despair if you find the first part difficult. It is really a search for light and for an understanding which does not come in rational terms, does not solve the problem Cora maybe I can say, spell l'histoire de spell the suspense. She will not find out what really happened to her mother. But there is another kind of understanding, and somebody asked me once, and I just said, well, the best thing that happened, so the person was reading a novel and said, I look forward to see what happened to Stella, and I thought, oh, she was going to be disappointed, and I said, the best thing that happened to Stella is to be in the book. So that the novel ends with a dream and then a dance, both of which don't bring a definite answer on a factual level, but they bring an inner resolution to the narrators fumbling through uncertainties and fantasies about her mother's death. And so that because memory and dream are very much related. And I was very interested in how, not in psychoanalytical terms, but in how memory is, in creative terms, and in how memory is processed by dream, and in the most imaginative ways. And also I was interested in dance, not only for formal reasons, and for this extraordinary aspect in dance where you convey forms of thought that are abstract through, in modern dance, I'm thinking of modern dance, which I'm more interested in, through something which is still the figure, the body. I became also interested and read a lot about dance, about methods of notation in dance and choreography, and observations made by dancers about how the body memory works in dance, because I think for all these people who were in captivity, the body was extraordinarily important, and having all the time perception of one's body, because that one in the torture system, alienating oneself from one's body was one of the most effective methods of destroying the self. And so in dance I saw the counterpart of those ways of working the body. And Tony Bentler, who is an American choreographer, wrote an extraordinary memoir among many that I could read, and he said something very beautiful, that dance is an act of loss itself, laid bare, and all the more moving for it. In relationship to this art aspect, which is so important, that a counterbalance to the trauma in the novel, it so happened that I have been solicited to contribute to collaborative art projects, in which, before the novel was published and after, in which parts of the novel appeared in other configurations, and passing them from the literary environment to that of art, or associating parts of the novel with images, contributed to a sense of opening, which the whole story builds up to. So there was an interesting experience, as if the novel was doing itself what the characters in the novel are doing. So I would like to insist on the fact that there is a balance between that legacy of darkness and also that of three women facing it. There is Stella, the one who disappeared, the mother, Cora, her daughter, but in the background there is also the grandmother, and she only appears, she's an episodic presence, but she's a carrier of that other life of the old times, and of those people who had to efface who they had been because it was dangerous. And even if the novel focuses on the adolescent who lost her mother, on the background there is this grandmother who is also always called grandmother, but she's a mother who has lost a child. So that story was also extraordinarily powerful, but I felt that novel could not carry that one too, because it was and so there is this continuity between the three women in different time periods, in different histories. And there is a story of a necklace, red amber necklace, that appears in this network of images which contribute to the coherence of the narrative, that appears from the beginning to end, and which is a metaphor for this legacy. And so this is very important for me to have this. It was very important to have this balance between the legacy of darkness on the one side and Stella's luminous figure on the other, recreated by Cora and Luca through their evocations and their art. Surviving is no virtue, it is an act of love, is one of the lines in the novel, and it is something that helps them carry on this form of love, which is more, more general terms, love for human beings. You have probably noticed that in dark circumstances, people with an aura stand out in more remarkable ways than usual. I have seen such people since I was a child, and I have never talked to them. Some I just saw in a distance across the street, and it was something extraordinarily beautiful. They were like beings coming from another world for me. And so that was one of my preoccupations in this novel, with creating this figure, absent figure of Stella, with what after images remain of the passage of such beings with an aura into oblivion, and how, if we take the time to look at them, they may illuminate something into ourselves. Sorry. I will read, you will tell me when you're tired. I'm sorry. The novel is structured into three parts. Three parts or three chapters, each of which is composed of this small mosaic, like longer or shorter sections. And the first part is entitled Stella's Return, the second Standing, Walking, Running, which is the title of a choreography by Merce Cunningham, and the third, The Dream Solution. I will read the prologue, entitled On the Other Side, which sets the tone and locates the narrative, if not in a specific geographical area, in a symbolic area that is on the other side, between the side of the living and the dead, of the real and the imaginary, of the actual and the dream. And it is actually a dream that Cora has with her mother. And then I will read two short fragments from Stella's Return, and one longer and one shorter fragment from the second part, The Dream Solution. I'd like just to mention two facts, maybe because when I read it's not obvious. There is a secondary character, a government official, who brings Stella back in Cora's fantasy that he returns, and he appears in the novel with the initials BK. So maybe when I read that sounds strange, but that is. Also, I have worked with a series of appropriations that are woven into the narrative. Some of you might recognize some of them, some are known, others are anonymous. They come from a completely variety of sources. Some are literary, some are not. And again, this is not something decorative or some kind of fancy technique, but they are just part of the material that I work with, and like art, part of life. And the other point before is that you will notice, especially in the last but one section that I read, that tone of the narrator, so I've chosen only the parts narrated by Cora. In the middle section is narrated by Luca, but the reading that might create complications. So I focused on Cora. You might notice that this woman is 35, okay, when she has these images about her mother coming back. And when I started writing, I hadn't realized, but at a certain point it occurred to me, because I like to read aloud and to care about the rhythm, and I realized that here is this woman who is 35 years old, relatively educated, and this is the tone of a teenager. And then it became obvious that I couldn't change that tone, because that would change completely. I tried something more adult-like, and it seemed quite boring. And then I explained more in class today, I've read material about children losing their parents early on, and how part of the personality continues and grows and develops normally, and there's just one aspect, the voice or the something in one's self that remains blocked at that age. And I've said this in class. I heard Albert Camus' daughter, Camus died in a car accident when his daughter was very young, and I heard her on the radio a few years ago. She was in her 60s, and she had the voice of a little child. It was extraordinary. So I assumed that that was the voice. So that I have to explain, because that might be strange. It's not the voice of a 30-year-old, 35-year-old woman. On the other side, circus of leaves and dust rise toward a horizon of storm. With hurried steps we make our way through the crowd. Stella takes my hand in hers, then suddenly drops it, slows her pace, and barely reaching my bony shoulder, urges me forward. Say pardon, she says in a low voice. Pardon, as she used to prompt me when I was her child, and had no doubt that mother knew the right thing to do. Was this still true? Who knows? We have no time for questions. On the other side of the street, two men in grey suits are waiting for us, pretending to provide protection. Their presence constricts my margin of action to its drastic limit. Given the circumstances, all I can do is keep an eye on Stella. She is here now, and clarifying whatever might be worth clarifying isn't going to change anything, nor bring us any further than that. On the other side, two gigantic zebras come into sight. They trot alongside a row of sumptuous buildings. Slender but firm, their hips swing with a rhythm they alone seem to master. Through the curtain of dust, their gait stupefies us, and as they move onward, the stripes on their backs dissolve in the murky air. At the corner of the street, in a perfectly orchestrated choreography, the zebras pass three ostriches, walking from the opposite direction, as colossal as they are, as momentous. The coat of feathers covering their bodies, ashy in color and consistency, could be blown any minute now by a gust of wind. Uncannily elegant, their pace is firm. Their ancestral reptile heads make me uncomfortable. The heat seems suddenly too heavy to bear. We lack space, my throat packed with dust. I turn to check if mother's still there, and take her hand in mine, by now the same size as hers. A bird slashes the air above our heads. Stella takes its harsh wailing as a sign of our impending displacement from what she calls the jungle zone to the menagerie zone. In light of her experience, she insists, the displacement risks becoming systematic and chaotic, and not or chaotic, she points out. This odd idea seems to flow from what she said earlier, that since we are related, our separation was mandatory to prevent the dissemination of the likes of us in space. Slowly, I remove my hand from hers to sketch out the options we have with naive gestures intended to convince Mother that I'm able to protect her. It's a matter of security, undoubtedly a pun to her, I argue, and in spite of my inappropriate, insistent words, I'm trying to be as affectionate and reassuring as I can. For all that, my arguments clash with her unequivocal smile. As we turn our eyes from that scene in slow motion, the horizon has grown into a maze of branches. Their swinging overwhelms us. The sky is neither luminous nor dark. Still, some formless substance, more like a blinding light, presses on our eyelids. It seems to come from a source other than the sun, a magnifying glass, or the goggled eye of a commanding bird. In the middle of its crystalline lens, we are misty figures. Given the situation, patterns of space, atmosphere, geometry of humors, all I can do for now is keep looking for Stella. So now from that dream, this return of the mother develops into a series of imaginary actual possibilities. And in the first part of the novel entitled Green, Cora meets her mother. We'll see under what circumstances. 1. Green. Her eyes were still a tender green, and as they glanced over the dull platform, they transformed into rare shades. She was being returned by a government official who appeared unwilling to leave her solely in my care. He was in charge of helping us out, he said, to find us an apartment, to assist her in settling in, to reassure us that from now on everything was going to be as it should. BK was not unattractive, alert, attentive, anxious to see us safe. The tanned lizard skin of his face added to his appeal as it did to his bossy air. When I saw them emerge from the train, he in front, holding her hand obligingly, she hardly brushing the steps, it was 8 o'clock in the morning, in the middle of summer. The heat was already livening up. I couldn't help being tired. Her body was thin, a body of air, watchful, reserved. Stella stepping off the train in slow motion, drifting out of sleep or some other inert state unfit for the situation, a woman still attached to some remote landscape in no haste to reach my comforting arms, haunted by her absence. It was hard to tell if her features had been firmed or rather blurred by the spaces she had passed through. Her listless pace, in contrast to her startled gaze, her indifference to words and the disregard for me that I soon experienced in the most unexpected ways, only added to the surprise and confusion I felt at her sudden appearance, then at her reticence, which, apart from a few moments, she maintained throughout her brief return from her long journey. Yet, what could I expect? She must have been 55 by then, and I 35. Still, in spite of this gap, we looked about the same age. Mother had been declared dead 20 years to the day. Four, Stella with flowers. Some days before the call from the government official secretary notifying me of Stella's arrival and soliciting my presence at the main station of our small capital on August 8th at 8 o'clock in the morning to welcome your mother, metallic voice, starch articulations laying the words bare. Stella in the front yard of our city house. Stella passing through a bright gallery, flowering tobacco, or Queens of the Night, white, star-shaped, hypnotic. Datura enhancing the fragrance that made us one in the night, cosmos in lavender, pink and violet hues, cornflower in blue spots, wild chamomile. Stella's lips forming in perfect circles, spelling out a silent code of colors in the strategies of survival. Summer seems without end as I come near her, and she ignores my presence or is unable to notice it. She moves a slow hand, picks a white flower, sticks it in her hair. Brown is her hair, and as it spreads on her shoulders, it turns red, thick, viscid, drips along her arm, down her index finger, pointing to the mailbox. The mailbox is by the entrance gate, made of wood and shaky. The postman has a rusted bicycle in the blue washed-out uniform. He's already gone. He comes back. "Peekaboo," he shrieks. "How's your grandfather's automobile, by the way? We've got a nice one, don't we, from the old times." He says, "Your dog barks at me." "Here's a piece of bread for your dog," he says. "Foreign brand, that car. Stubborn man he was. Kistibor." "What?" "Kistibor, you granddaughter of a Kistibor. Unhealthy origins to the roots. And say, Smarty, how many languages does that mom of yours speak? Feeding you with them too, Smarty, ain't she?" "We are honest people, sir." "Sir," he grins. "We finished them off, those sirs. But they've got offspring like you, Smarty. Too many languages. Foreign, like that car. You get letters from abroad, don't I know that? Huh. You think yourselves clever, educated. Pfft. The blood dripping from mother's index finger has grown into a pool at her feet. Soon it reaches my toes. It's lukewarm and soothing. "No good languages, not in the register, not allowed." "What register, sir? Don't you see my mother's bleeding to death?" "Who cares? I'm a nice guy. No matter what you think, ready to lend a helping hand. Here's bread for your dog." "Don't you touch my dog," I shout, "or mother will kill you." Phew. His sneering laughter lags behind him, and a thick odor of sweat with it. Mother keeps stroking the dog with her unhurt hand. She pours milk into a bowl, but he won't have it. He gulps from the red pool instead. Milk isn't good against poison, I suddenly remember, but she seems not to. The dog must know there is something wrong with mother, but doesn't want to upset her, or wants to help us as he can. With his pale tongue, he clears up the pool at her feet. Perhaps she too does what she can under the circumstances. On the hand that pours the milk with the dog's bowl into the dog's bowl, mother wears the unsold ring. She's fed me on the others. That's one thing the postman doesn't know about, how grandmother had sold all they had, rings, coins, and necklaces on the black market to feed me. Or he just doesn't care about that because there is already enough proof against us. Just a little bit more? Or are you tired? Where are we? Time, okay. Maybe I'll just read a shorter section. Is that okay? About his grandmother. So this is a section in which Cora remembers how she spent the time in the house with her grandmother after the mother's death or disappearance, and how she was training to become a dancer. And there's this conflict of generations, and these two completely different forms of mourning that they have, and this form of love that is so strange because they can't communicate and they are each somehow enclosed into their own suffering. Grandmother was so hard to read. Neither sorrow nor joy glimmering in her eyes, nothing but round mineral green. Just look her straight in the eyes and you'd lose ground. Mother I could cheer up with a handful of tricks in my pockets, but grandmother was hard to please, so hard. We spent days and nights, each of us on her ocean of silence. Every now and then her expression softened as if she was about to reach a shaft of light, a cornflower in a meadow, a horse playing in his paddock. We'd go out, she'd buy me a steaming Greek cheese pie from the stand at the end of the corner, or a necklace from the department store downtown. However, most of the time she kept herself busy with the house. One day she declared that time had come for me to wear a precious ring. But where would I buy one for you now? We can't find rings like we used to have, she said, and have had to sell, she didn't say, but that's what I'd heard. I'd heard they sold all the precious rings they had to feed me. That one and only ring was made of leftovers, bits of golden chain, orphan earrings, broken bracelets, tiny Baptist crosses stripped of their necklaces. Whatever she couldn't sell under the table, grandmother had the goldsmith melt and shape into a golden band. The last ring mother wore would now be mine, since there was no way to find a precious ring for me, one that suited grandmother's taste. And in that same chapter, Cora remembers a conversation her mother had on the phone with somebody that turns out to be a secret police agent, and the conversation has to do with a tape recorder that she had found, and I'm not going to reveal the suspense. Mother had bought it from someone, the Gruding, that had been smuggled into the country, someone reported, spelling out something like a secret code, reel to reel deluxe TK241. Bulky, heavy, but what a treat. I fought to keep my first and only tape recorder when the people in grey clothes came to get it after the accident, and I did manage to, thanks to a spell of rage. There was some doubt about who it was who had brought the German-made tape recorder into the country, introduced it, said the report they produced and goggled at with strong conviction. Mostly, the investigators asked for the tape, as they had before the accident. It was the other tape they wanted, the tape Mother had supposedly brought home with the Gruding. It was inside, they insisted, when she said she hadn't brought any tape home, and I suspected it wasn't a music tape they meant. There was a tape in the Gruding that Mother had not declared. Big and round and illicit, they insisted. The dictionary definition of that word chilled me to the bone. It sounded like a word that could put my life in danger. It was not in my intention, she had said over the phone. That much I remember from one late afternoon, shortly before the accident. She wore a cotton dress with a black floral pattern over a field of cobalt blue, and there was some mess. No, that's not a word Mother would use. There must have been some misunderstanding. No, yes, unfortunate misunderstanding. At the airport, yes, the person I bought it from was in a hurry. No, a friend. I mean, he was a friend's friend on business in our country. No, we don't have any. We don't have relatives abroad. Never had. Then she laughed. Ha ha, in a low voice, unlike she used to laugh on regular days when she happened to laugh. Then she ran short of words or sounds. She grabbed a folded sheet of paper from the desk and fanned herself. I carried it myself straight home. Yes, I mean, someone drove me home, a woman, an acquaintance from the hospital. They are reliable people, have worked for the government abroad. I ran into her at the airport and she offered to give me a lift. It's for my daughter. She's a teenager now and trains as a dancer, you see. That's why we need it. 2 suitcases? I don't see what you mean. There must be some mistake, I'm afraid. Haha, she continued. In any event, I had no time to touch it. I work, you know. It was just an occasion, a second-hand tape recorder, that's all. And to tell the truth, we don't even know how to use it yet. Just 3 women in the house. You know, I have an old mother. Tell them we are honest people, Stella, shouted grandmother from the garden. We don't want them in the house again. Tell them to stay away. She was trimming the rose bushes and making a lot of noise with her heavy scissors. I heard Stella shut the window, as if what grandmother said didn't matter, or maybe she just pretended she hadn't heard her. A draft slammed the door. I stuck my ear to it, held my breath. No, in the evenings I type articles for medical journals, you see, translations. No texts of any other kind. Medicine is my field. I have a girl to raise, you see, an old mother. No, thank you, we aren't in need of anything, thank you. We manage with what we have. We don't really need much, you know. But I do comply with the instructions, I do, to the office, to your office. Oh, thank you, I'm afraid I know it's heavy, you know, it's heavy. In fact, had I known how heavy it was, just the tape, you mean. She was running out of Hans, she coughed. Then I felt something in mother's tone that was not in tune with her manners. Another stream of syllables passed through the door instead. Someone, of course, can stop by and check what's on that tape, or even take it away. Her voice dropped before she hung up. Then I heard her light step approaching the door. She must have rested her hand on the doorknob for a long moment, since I could hear her breath, and when it had slowed down, she came into the kitchen. Beyond suspicion, I was safely seated on my chair, busy molding breadcrumb mannequins. She hadn't noticed me behind the living room door, and so much the better. There was enough embarrassment in the atmosphere already. I might have been dumb and clumsy, but at least I understood that much. Her face was the color of a whitewashed wall, the rims of her eyes thin red lines. I shrugged my shoulders. Could mother fear anything? The bones of my thin legs suddenly felt as if they were made of cotton. My hands and fingers too. Softly, a small white animal passed from mother's shoulders onto mine, then under my skin. It nested in my stomach or just a bit higher in the place Stella called the solar plexus. The small white animal's heart throbbed with mine or with a slight discord. Something told me mother shouldn't hear how we bonded, the small animal and I, nor should she know how cotton feels when she held my hands. I raised my chin and showed my pretty day smile. She held my head to her chest for a while, the combination of soap and moist warmth overwhelming. Shall we make that cherry pie, miss? A long, long time later, she was at the train station. She was there to provide some evidence at last of what she had seen in that remote space. Then suddenly something went wrong and it started all over again. A man she did not trust proposed a deal, and I was there. Someone must have said I should be. How couldn't I be there when mother, who had been declared dead 20 years to the day, was being returned by a government official? But she knew better. She did what she could to keep me out of it, because what happened to her and everyone else mattered little now. What matters is that I keep pace and balance on wooden planks with blistered paint. What matters is that part water we serve beauty in the same fashion, because one's love is greater than oneself. Because for each one who vanished, somewhere else another survived, deriving their strength from who knows what, a friend, a relative, the remains of sharing and trust, or perhaps from a tree's sudden blossom, a handful of syllables rehearsed in the dark, a capacity for wonder, they'd managed to spare. She has other things to tell me, so many, but without notice we are running short of time. She says for now I have to focus on my opening, patch up whatever I can, and yes, I should call her. And I look for coins in my pocket. Instead of small change, there is a dark red amber bead lingering in there, smooth, almost round. The bead drifts through my fingers, drops in the grass, and rolls there for a while before I lose sight of it. Had I bent down and touched it, it might have broken. Thank you.
Questions?
Yes?
I'm glad to hear that I'm not the only one who found it very difficult to understand the book, but what I did understand was the beauty of your words. There were some just such poetic, beautiful sentences all the way through, and now the book is a lot more understandable.
Thank you.
As you collected these stories, did you keep them in a special file until you had enough to make the book, or the remembrances that you gathered from other people, or?
I haven't worked with the material in a systematic way. It just grew progressively. Actually, the core of the novel was this story with the loss of the mother. And then I became progressively interested in these stories. And so I started reading and looking at things, and I didn't work with them systematically. I think just when when you are on a track, you have the impression that things just come your way. Maybe had I been involved in another project, I would have noticed those things, but then suddenly everything seemed significant. So I did keep some on my files, some I just some just came up as I was writing. They were, memories that were called by certain episodes that I was writing that brought to mind other episodes. So it was a bit of a living, process of association.
Hey, I remember when we were in advanced poetry earlier, you said when you first moved to France, you worked as a translator of some?
No, I worked as a translator when I was in Romania.
Okay.
I mean, I was also writing essays and I did. I was solicited to translate a Romanian poet. I mean, I did not work as a translator, but I was solicited to translate one of Romania's most important poets, Ana Blandiana, and I worked with the British publisher Anvil Press, and so it happened then, and I was in between projects and didn't know exactly what, so it was very interesting to translate that book.
Do you think it's important for writers and readers of creative works to read translated pieces of literature?
Yes, it depends very much on the translations, but some works I read in the translation just because I know that the translation is particularly significant. But there are languages we don't have access to, so then we need to have recourse to the translation. But yes, absolutely, I think it's essential to be confronted with different, creative vocabularies and worlds and forms of the imagination.